me to be a man. And the thesis of this series is basically this: God made the world to need men. And not just any man, any kind of man, but men of moral character, men of moral clarity, moral courage, and men of moral resolve. In other words, God made the world to need men who will live out their masculine design by moving forward into life's chaos in order to bring order, beauty, and life to the world. That's our purpose, guys, and that's the thesis of this series, that God made the world to need us. The problem is, in our world today, is that these kind of men are missing. We don't see the men of character and clarity, moral clarity and courage and resolve, men who are living out their design. We're not seeing that today, and as a result, what's happening? Our world is falling apart. And again, the reason our world is falling apart, one of the main reasons, is because God made the world to need men, and we don't have the kind of men living out their design as God created the world to need. And now the key verse for this series is 1 Corinthians 16:13. Be on the alert, stand firm in the faith, act like men, be strong. And we noted three things about this verse. First of all, the verse is a command. In other words, acting like men is what God expects from us. This isn't a suggestion. This isn't an idea. This is a command from the God who created us. We are to act like the men He has created us to be. Now, when we look at that command to act like men, there's an assumption behind that command. And the assumption is this: acting manly presupposes a recognized standard. In other words, when we say act like men, there's a picture that comes to our mind that, okay, this is what it means to act like a man. Or there's a picture it comes to our mind that says, this isn't what it means to act like a man. We all have this presupposition of what it means to act like a man. We all have a standard that comes into our mind when we hear that command. But the question is that the standard that God assumes? Is that the standard behind the command? And so we said that there's a rule for Bible study that we have to take into mind, and that rule is this: while the Bible was written for us, it was not written to us. Who was 1 Corinthians written to? It was written to men about 2,000 years ago in the Middle East. And so this is the key to understanding what this idea of what it means to act like a man, what the assumption of the recognized standard is. And what the rule means for us then is this: to rightly understand what the command, act like men, means for you and I as men today, we first must discover what it meant to the men it was originally written to in the first century. If we can understand how they heard that command, then we will understand what it means for us today. So we spent some time looking at that. And we said if we go back to the first century and how the male readers would have understood that, there was a framework out of which they would have heard that act like a man. And the framework was built around this idea of the creation story, that God created everything, and He created it in a certain way with a certain design for a certain purpose. And that included men. And based on that creation story, that then became the source of first century's men standard for manliness. In other words, based on the creation story, this is what a first century man would think it meant to be a man. It would come from what God created men to be. And based on that, you would have the command, act like men. Okay? So that's how a first century man would have heard that. From the creation story, that would bring about this standard for manhood, which would then inform the command. Now, we start with the command, act like men. And what we have to ask is, what does that mean? Well, what it means is that there's an assumption behind the command. And if we're following this rule of Bible study, then we have to say, well, where did we get this assumed manly standard? And again, it goes back to where? The creation story. And what all this means then is to answer the question, what is a man? We must examine the biblical story of creation. And over the first 4 talks, that's really what we've been doing. And we learned from the creation story that in Genesis 1, that's where you find the creation story, Genesis 1 and 2. In Genesis 1, what in essence we have is the author introduces us to the God who made men. If you want to know who made us, here's the God who made us. That's Genesis 1. And what we saw was that this God is a God who powerfully speaks and moves into a chaotic and uninhabitable place. Why? To create a good world of order, beauty, and life where people can thrive and relationships flourish. That's the God of Genesis 1. Now, in Genesis 2, after introducing us in Genesis 1 to the God who made men, in Genesis 2, we're introduced to the first man that God made. And who is that man? Adam. And what do we learn in Genesis 2? Well, what we learned in Genesis 2 was that Adam is created to uniquely image God as a zakar, or as a male, as a pointed one. And the idea there has to do with movement and strength and life. It's a life-giving movement. So Adam is created to uniquely image God as a zakar. Then he is placed into God's good but untamed world and told, in essence, this: be like me and do what I have done. Be like me and do what I have done. Well, what has God done? Well, you go back where? To Genesis 1. God has moved in powerful ways, and he has spoken powerful ways into a chaotic and uninhabitable place to bring order, beauty, and life, to create environments where people can thrive and relationships can flourish. Now, Adam, go do and be like me. Do this. Do what I have done. In other words, God says to you and I as men, like me, speak and move with power and strength into chaos. Like me, bring order, beauty, and life by subduing that chaos. And, like me, create a good, life-giving place where people can thrive and relationships can flourish. That, in essence, is the masculine mandate that God gives to us in creation. That we are to be like God. He speaks with power into chaos, to bring order, beauty, and life, to create environments where people can thrive and relationships can flourish. That is the masculine mandate given to all. Now, based on this mandate, we then offered an answer to the question, and here's the answer that we gave. What is a man? A man is an adult human male image bearer, created and tasked by God to partner with God, in advancing God's ongoing good purposes for human flourishing. How? By uniquely reflecting God's creative power that brings order, beauty, and life to chaotic places through both his presence and his movement. In other words, our identity is we are adult human male image bearers. That's our identity. Our purpose? We are created and tasked by God to partner with him in advancing his ongoing good purposes for human flourishing. That's what men are for. And how do we do that? Our function? By uniquely reflecting God's creative power that brings order, beauty, and life to chaotic places through both his presence and his movement. Think for a minute with me of the chaotic places in your life. We all have chaotic places because the world since the fall has become very chaotic. And as you think of those places in your life, They could be relational places. Most of them, they're relational places. But they could just be circumstantial things. Wherever you think of those chaotic places, know this. As a man, God has made you not to avoid those chaotic places, not to intimidate those chaotic places away, not to try to overcome them and control them and manage them, but to enter into them. Why? To reflect God's life-giving power in a way that brings from the chaos order, beauty, and life, like God did in Genesis 1. And what's the purpose? So that we can create as men places where people can thrive and relationships flourish. One of the things that we always say at AHM is that men are built to bless. Guys, that's how we bless. Not by avoiding chaos, by entering into it as men. Now, last time we focused on this masculine movement into chaos. Men are made to move. Men feel good when they move. Men hate when they feel stuck, when they feel paralyzed. And so men were made to move. And we said that a man's movement into chaos is not about fixing problems by finding right answers or the correct solutions, but rather it's about engaging people. How? By asking questions where there are not necessarily clear answers. If we're about fixing problems, we will stay distant from chaos. We'll keep ourselves arm's length from chaos. But if we're about engaging people, then what we will be doing is our arms will be out and we'll be embracing the chaos. We'll be entering into the chaos as men, just as God entered the chaos in Genesis 1. Now, we suggested then that when a man's movement is about fixing chaos, when we're about fixing problems, we see the chaos before us, and we think, I got to fix that thing because I don't like it, then what we will find is that we will end up demanding that life be manageable and become angry and depressed when it's not. In other words, think of that chaos for a minute. A lot of times we will get angry and we will get depressed when we look at that chaos and we feel, I should be able to manage it, I should be able to control it, but I can't. What's wrong with me? Also, when we're about fixing the chaos, we'll become resentful towards anyone who gets in the way of helping, of managing the chaos. My kids are making the chaos worse. So what do? You yell at your kids. Your wife isn't cooperating, so what do? You become resentful at her. Your dog is making the chaos worse. So what do? You kick him. Wherever we're about fixing chaos, we will become resentful towards anyone who gets in the way. Third, when we're about fixing chaos, our core commitment will be to protect ourselves from being viewed as inadequate. I don't want to be seen as inadequate as a man, so guess what I'll do? How I'll protect myself is by attacking people. Well, it's your fault. Blaming people. When I attack, I'm intimidating the chaos away. When I'm blaming, I'm telling them, it's not my fault. It's your fault that there's chaos. Excusing the chaos, or I'll just avoid it altogether. Also, when we're about fixing chaos, we will wrongly view God as a vending machine God. That if I put in the right change and pull the right levers, then I'll finally get what I want. And if God isn't giving me what I want, He's not helping me manage my chaos, then what do? Well, I must not be putting in the right change, or I must be pulling the wrong lever, or I'm putting in the right change and I'm pulling the right lever, but God just doesn't cooperate. If you want to know if you view God as a vending machine God, listen to your prayers. Are your prayers about people thriving and flourishing, and about the part that you can play in it, or is it about how God can work in people's life to make your life better? And then, if our life is about fixing problems as men, and we can't fix those problems, we'll seek relief from the chaos by trying to manage, by numbing ourselves through alcohol or drugs, or pleasuring ourselves through fantasy or food, or distracting ourselves by finding hobbies or activities that make me feel I'm a man, because I can't manage this over here, but I know how to do this here. Guys, this is all of us. It's all of us when we give in to the Darwinian story around us that says you are the point, and the way you remain the point is survival of what? The fittest. But when we live as if we are the point and everyone revolves around us to make our life better, God will be missed, our masculinity will be muddled, and chaos will be multiplied. And we become more and more frustrated as men. Now, we contrasted all that with the idea that when our movement is about engaging the chaos, we're not about fixing problems, then we will have an opportunity to find God. Why? Because God, according to Genesis 1, is a God who is always moving in the chaos. And if we are avoiding the chaos, guess what we're avoiding? Where God is. God is found in the chaos. When we move in the chaos, we have an opportunity to find God like we've never found Him before. Secondly, we'll have an opportunity also to be like God by moving forward into the chaos like God moved into the chaos. So we'll find God, we'll be like God, and guys, that's what we're meant to be as men, to reflect Him. Thirdly, we'll have an opportunity to act like men, because we can't act like men unless we are acting like what? The God of Genesis 1. And what did the God of Genesis 1 do? He didn't avoid the present, and He moved, and He spoke, and He acted in the chaos. And then lastly, we'll have the opportunity to bless others. We move in God's life-giving power, bringing order, beauty, where people can thrive. People can't thrive in chaos. They thrive in environments. Relationships don't thrive in chaos. They thrive in environments where there's order, beauty, and life. That's the God who created us, and He created us as men to be like Him in doing this. We're driven, when we live like this, we're driven by the creation story that says, not I am the point of my life, but rather God is the point of life. Everything revolves around me, around God, including me. And when we live like that, our manhood will be realized. Order and beauty and life will flourish, and relationships and people will thrive. Guys, why is the world in such a mess today? It's because we have men who are not living out the creation story where God is at the point and we were made to be like Him. As a result, manhood isn't being realized, order, beauty, and life isn't flourishing, and relationships and people aren't thriving. The world was made to need men. So we then ask, the question is this: if to act like men is to be like God, and if to be like God involves movement into the chaos, and if movement into the chaos is less about fixing things and more about asking questions to engage it, then what will this kind of masculine movement actually look like? And we suggested that there are two kinds of masculine movement. Two kinds of ways that we move in this world as men. First, there is good masculine movement, and second, there is what? bad masculine movement. We suggested that good masculine movement could be described as the movement of a warrior poet, whereas bad masculine movement could be described as the movement of a dreamer destroyer. Now, when it came to the movement of a warrior poet, we talked about two things. When we're thinking about a warrior, we want to think about the courage of a warrior. And when we think about a poet, we want to think about the imagination of a poet. Now, we looked at the warrior poet last time, but last time we just mentioned this dreamer destroyer, but next time we're going to begin looking at this idea of a dreamer destroyer movement and the whole idea of toxic masculinity. Because toxic masculinity is really the movement of a dreamer or destroyer. Okay? So regarding the warrior, let's just review this just a second. Regarding the warrior, we said warrior courage is movement in spite of fear, not its absence. In other words, we're always going to be afraid. We're always going to have fear. There's going to be terror in every man's life, especially if you realize that you were made to move into this chaos and there's no way that you can tame the chaos. That's going to create fear. But courage is not the absence of fear, it's the movement in spite of it. And what we learned is that courage coexists with fear. A man of courage will have fear and terror in his heart at the same time. It's not one or the other, it's both and. If you have courage, you will also have fear. If you don't have any fear, it's not courage, it's probably just foolishness. Second, warrior courage is also movement when the outcome is not guaranteed. A lot of men will move into chaos when they know, oh, well, I can handle this. But when you can't handle it, when you don't know what the outcome is going to be, are you going to move? That's courage. In other words, courage acts out of necessity. I was made as a man to move, and if I don't move, then nothing's going to happen. There isn't going to be I don't know how this is going to turn out, but I know it's going to turn out bad if I don't move, so I just got to move. Why? Because that's what I was made to do. Thirdly, warrior courage is movement when the primary concern is not the outcome. I may hope for a good outcome, but I'm moving not because I'm hoping to get the outcome. What is it about? It's driven by transcendence. I was made for something bigger. I was not made to achieve outcomes. I was made to reflect God through movement. That's courage. Now, regarding the poet, we said that poetic imagination begins with a heart of integrity. And remember what we said a heart of integrity was, guys? It's a heart that pretends about nothing. I'm not going to pretend things are better than they are or worse than they are. I'm going to see them as they really are. I'm going to see the world as it really is. I'm going to see God as I perceive, as He is, and as I experience Him. I'm going to understand myself and talk about and recognize myself, everything about me. I'm not going to pretend anything. I'll see the good and bad and the ugly in me and everything around me. And when we do that, when we stop pretending, like C.S. Lewis says, that we will conclude that there must be something bigger and better to hope in than this disappointing and scary world. I was made for something bigger than this, because what we're experiencing in this world is far less. And what that will do is that it will cause us to respond with a step of faith. A heart of integrity will move us to walk and move forward in faith. Now, faith sees God's unseen movement. We have an unseen God who's moving in unseen ways to accomplish yet to be seen things. And faith says, I see that, and I believe that, and I will act in light of that. And so through our eyes of faith, we imagine what God might be presently doing in life's chaos and moving to join him in it. We don't know exactly what he's doing, but we do know this, that he is doing something. And he's doing the chaos to make things new. That's part of the story of God. He's moving in chaos to make things new. And because we believe that, we begin to look for it, and we begin to act in light of that. Now notice, a heart of integrity stirs in us a holy discontentment. I don't like the way the world is. And guys, even better news is God doesn't like the way the world is. That's why he knew. And so there's this holy that is, and so I have to open my eyes to see what God is doing. And when that holy discontentment it opens us to mystery and transcendence. There are things going on that we can't explain. The world is more than stuff. The world has mystery. It has transcendence. Why? Because it's made by a mysterious, transcendent God who hasn't abandoned us, but is here present with us, working and moving to make all things new. And guys, he is inviting us as his sons through Jesus Christ to join him in that process as men. We then last time concluded with this scenario. And the scenario is this. You leave today, and when you get home, imagine your wife is sitting there on the couch. Remember the scenario? And she's not just sitting there, she's crying. And as she's crying, you work up the courage to ask her, "What's wrong, honey?" And she just looks at you and she responds, "It's us." And the question was, what should you do as a warrior poet? Should you pretend you didn't hear her and go work in the yard? Or should you get angry, tell her she's too sensitive and that she doesn't appreciate how good she has it? Or should you get out your calendar and plan a date night? I can fix this right away. It's kind of like when my wife, finally, I listened to her when she told me that what she was angry at me for. And I thought, I finally listened to her instead of just making excuses. This was, oh gosh, when we first started working on our marriage, and I started working on me as a man. And she kept telling me, things. I never listened. And finally, I learned, I said, oh, I can see why you'd be angry. And it was like, oh, we had a breakthrough. So I learned the key to fixing life, to fixing my marriage. And the key was just listening to my wife and saying, oh, okay. And so I said to her, I literally said this, okay, honey, I want you to think of all the things you're angry at me about. And we're going to go out to dinner. And I want you to share those with me. And so I was going to fix this at a dinner, Italian. And I was not only going to fix it at a dinner on a Thursday night, but I was going to fix it between the ordering and the entree coming. So by the time we ordered, by the time, they brought out our order, I was going to fix the whole thing. I really believe this. And so when they came and we ordered, I looked at her and I said, with confidence, I said, so honey, what are you angry at me about? And she literally reached in her pocket and took out a piece of paper and she began to unfold it. And as she unfolded it, I was feeling really kind of intimidated. And really kind of like, uh-oh. And so my response, I started to laugh. You got a list. Guess what she did? Folded it back up, put it in her pocket. It was the worst meal we ever had. So that was my get it on your calendar and we'll plan a date night and we'll fix it. In case you were thinking that was a good one, guys, no, don't do that one. Or you could give her a side hug and tell her you'll try harder by practicing what you're learning at the men's meeting.
Amen.
There we go. Or you could do what Ray did, in our clip, offer her pills to stop her PMS. What should you do, guys? Well, last time we ended by saying this: whatever you do, act like a man. But the question is, exactly what would that look like with chaos sitting there on the couch? Not that our wife is chaos, but that her emotion is something we as men typically don't know what to do with. What should you do? Whether it's chaos in the couch, chaos in the car, chaos in the kitchen, chaos at work, what's a man to do? Well, we're going to take 5 minutes and we're going to come back and we're going to tell you how to fix your marriage. Prior to the break, we asked the question, what does it look like to act like a man when faced with the chaos of a crying wife whose tears are about us? What will it look like as a man to move into that chaos? Before I answer that question, though, there are 4 realities every man must know before engaging a crying wife. Okay, so if you have a crying wife, or an angry wife, or a wife that's is emotional, and all wives are, we get emotional, we show our emotions different, so this isn't putting women down at all. It's just recognizing that there's a difference in design and creation. But 4 realities you need to know before engaging a crying wife. Obviously, Raymond in our clip didn't understand these. So we want to make this hopefully a better turnout than Raymond had. So what are they? Reality number 1. Most men were not given as boys the skills for relating emotionally with women. Guys, that's a fact. Most men were not given as boys the skills for relating emotionally with women. What were we given? Well, boys are typically given skills to compete, not relate. We're typically given skills to perform, not to be present. And we're typically given skills to fix, not to engage. We're not given skills for relating emotionally with women. Now, what does this do? Well, this sets us, as we get older as men, it sets us up for what we might call a dead marriage or a lifeless marriage, since emotional closeness is what makes marriage life-giving. Okay? So we're not taught how to relate emotionally. To have a life-giving marriage requires emotional closeness. And thus, as a result, when chaos and conflict arise in his marriage, and it will, a man will not know what, a man will do what he's been trained as a boy to do. And what is it?
Fix it.
To fix it. Because that's what we've been trained to do as boys. Now, while he may temporarily fix the problem, his marriage will still lack the thing that gives its life: emotional closeness. And while it will lack emotional closeness and he will fix it, his wife will still feel this lack of closeness. He may not feel it. He may feel it's all taken care of. But his wife will still feel this lack of closeness, and she will continue to find ways, and they're typically negative ways, of telling him she doesn't feel close by fault-finding and criticizing. And it causes a man to feel what? Frustrated, confused, inadequate. And guys, when a man feels inadequate, especially in the presence of his wife, you know what he does? He gets angry and he withdraws. Anger and withdrawal are common in most marriages today when it comes to men. Reality number 2. Because men are not taught relational skills as boys, most men don't know what a crying wife needs. If you listen close to the clip, Raymond didn't have a clue what his wife needed. He thought she needed these pills. If you're listening, she told him what she needed. What did she need? What does your wife need? What does my wife need? What does a wife who is hurting need? Well, your wife needs to feel your undistracted presence with her. She needs to feel your undistracted presence with her. And did you notice that even when Ray was sitting there close to his wife and she was crying and he was there, what did he do? He didn't know what to do with that, so what did he do? He was distracted. Now it's time to go get those pills. When your wife feels your presence, she will feel something that every woman longs to feel. Chosen and desired. Your wife longs to feel chosen by you. She longs to feel desired by you. When a wife feels chosen and desired, she will feel beautiful as a woman. Just as men were made to reflect the power of God that brings life, women were made to reflect the beauty of God that enhances life. And when a woman feels beautiful, she will be open and soft and inviting and nurturing. When Deborah, in the clip, felt Raymond's presence, did you see how she just kind of melted and softened? But as soon as she felt him being distracted, what did she do? She closed and became hard and angry. Because men are not taught relational skills as boys, most men do not know what a crying wife needs. Guys, she needs your presence. Undistracted presence. Third reality. A man who is frustrated with his wife will often raise his voice, causing her to close up in fear. You know, how many times have I told my wife, I just don't, what do you want? I don't know what to do. And in raising my voice, it causes her to feel fear and close down. And I wasn't even yelling. And she would say, you got to stop yelling. And I'll say, I'm not yelling. I'm just frustrated. But notice this. Stephen Stosny writes this. He says, the males of all species of social animals have deeper, more resonant voices, specifically designed for roaring. The angry male voice gets deeper and louder and more menacing because it is designed to invoke fear of physical harm, whether he wants it to or not. Isn't that interesting? Something else is true, too. Men don't hear as well as women. That's why if a boy is sitting in the back of the class, he will be distracted because he's not hearing. If you put him up in the front of the class, guess what? his grades and everything, he becomes a better student. Why? Because he's able to hear better. So women hear more, and men's voices roar. Not only that, Stossny says this: when women get angry, they may sound shrill and unpleasant, but their voices rarely invoke fear of physical harm in adult men. They're annoying, he's saying, but they don't scare us like we're going to be destroyed. He says a man's voice creates fear in a woman. Studies, in fact, show that women are more sensitive to fear than men and are more prone to cope with their fear by shutting down. Maybe that's why Peter says in 1 Peter 3:7, husbands, treat your wives with respect as the weaker sex. And then he says this, so that your prayers may not be hindered. In other words, Peter says, guys, you got to know something about how God designed women. God designed a woman to be different than you. God designed a woman not to reflect strength, but to reflect beauty. And beauty is fragile. And guys, you need to honor that beauty as it really is. In fact, this is so important that we honor our wives according to God's design of them. God takes it so serious. He says, if you don't honor that design, what happens? It affects your relationship with me. You don't lose your salvation, but guess what? There is a distance between you and God when we don't honor His design in our wives. Reality number 4. A man who learns to be present with his wife will discover his masculine power to bring life to his marriage. Most men don't feel powerful in their marriage. They feel weak. They feel inadequate. And what I'm saying here is this: if we simply just learn to be the men that God created us to be present like God was present in Genesis 1 with the chaos, guess what you'll discover? That you really do have power to make a difference in your marriage. And you really do have power to bless your wife. A major cause of marital decline is a man's passive avoidance or his active dismissing of his wife's feelings, concerns, and opinions. I'm just not going to listen to those. When a man ignores, criticizes, or shuts down his wife's voice, she will always feel dismissed and devalued. And a wife who feels dismissed and devalued by her husband will eventually close her heart to him and also eventually close her body off to him as well. And now you got two people, nice people, living a nice life, but like a railroad track marriage, walking in parallel ways. 65% of all lifeless marriages are initially caused by a man's avoidance or dismissing his wife's feelings, concerns, or opinions. When we shut our wives down and we ignore or disrespect what they're thinking, saying, or feeling, we will feel inadequate in our marriage and we will feel weak as men. We'll feel weightless. But when we learn to simply be present and listen to our wives and hear our wives in an undistracted way, we will feel powerful as men. Why? Because we are acting like the men God created us to be. And so then, before you engage a crying wife, remember these 4 realities. Number 1, boys are not given skills for relating emotionally with women. That's true. Without relational skills, men will not know what a crying wife needs. And when a man doesn't know what his wife needs, he gets frustrated, he raises his voice, and he causes her to close up in fear, creating even a greater chaos. And a man who learns his wife needs his presence discovers his power to bring life to his marriage. Guys, before you go home and engage your wife, remember these 4 things. Now, let me give you just what can you do? The one thing you need to do as men, that we all need to do as men, is become a student of how male and female relationships work. We're typically not taught how to do that. And so we don't know how to do that. But what these 4 realities are, they're just ways of knowing how men and women work together relationally and emotionally. And so you got to become a student. 2 books that could help, that are simple books. They're engaging books. They're the kind of books, so when you read them, they ring true. The first one is How to Improve Your Marriage Without Talking About It by Stephen Stosny, the guy that I quoted, and Pat Love. And another book by Harville Hendricks, Making Marriage Simple, 10 Relationship-Saving Truths. These 2 books would be worth your purchase. But a danger in getting these books. Use these books only as a means for understanding the dynamics of the relationships, and not for finding a technique to fix the marriage. That's the danger when we read a book. We're looking for ways and techniques to fix the marriage. And a technique may be helpful, but if you're using techniques to fix, you're not going to be engaging. Second, and this is a warning, books like these can work to improve your marriage without ever requiring you to act like a man in your marriage. In other words, I can act in a certain way, follow a certain technique, and it can calm my wife and cause her to open to me. It can feel good, but guess what I've never done? I've never acted like a man. I've never used good movement to engage her. All I've done is use bad movement to try to placate her. So a danger and a warning with books like these. So if that's true, then the question we need to ask is, what will it look like to act like a man with a crying wife? Going back to our question. Let me give you 3 thoughts. First thought, understand that all chaos, whether it's with your wife, whether it's with your kids, whether it's inside yourself, whether it's at work, whether it's in the circumstance, whether it's on the road, wherever it is, all chaos is ultimately a test of your faith in the unseen God, who Hebrews 11 says, who is able to make fearful men strong. I love that. That God is able to make fearful men strong when it comes to faith. Listen to what it says. Hebrews 11, 34 through 35. By faith, and remember the whole chapter is about faith, and the author of Hebrews says that without faith it is impossible to please God. And so he says, by faith, these men overthrew kingdoms, ruled with justice, and received what God had promised them. They shut the mouths of lions, quenched the flames of fire, and escaped death by the edge of the sword. Now, look at it, says, their lack of courage. Whose lack of courage? The men that he just described. Their lack of courage was turned to strength. And they became powerful in battle, putting whole armies to flight. Notice, their lack of courage. If you have a translation, it might say, their weakness was turned to strength. The Greek word could be weakness. It could also be, the idea is fearfulness. Their fearfulness was turned to strength. Their lack of courage was turned to strength. Their weakness was turned to strength. How? By faith. By faith. Now notice, How do these fearful men become strong men who engage life's chaos with power? And isn't that the description of a man? They engage life's chaos with strength, and they create good places through this reflection of God's power. How do they do it? Instead of giving into their fear, they chose to lean into faith. Remember, guys, we all have fear. Fear is not the problem. Fear becomes the problem when we choose to let it direct and dictate our lives. But with every test of faith, every time we face chaos, that fear is triggered, and now there's a test of faith. Will we choose to trust ourselves and give in to our faith, our fear, or will we choose to do what? Trust God. Specifically, Hebrews says, they believed, and get this, throughout the whole chapter, it's emphasizing this. They believed in an unseen God who was moving in unseen ways to bring about his yet-to-be-seen promises. Unseen God, moving in unseen ways to bring about something I don't yet see. And they chose to believe this God. That was what their faith was placed in. Instead of giving in to their fear, they trusted this unseen God that they believed was moving amongst them to do things that have not yet been seen, but he's currently moving in unseen ways to do them. Based on this belief about God, when they were confronted by chaos, they chose to risk trusting God rather than protecting themselves. Guys, that's what God asks of us. God is an unseen God. We don't see him. God is here in this world today, and he's moving, but guess what? We don't see his movement. Sometimes we see it, but most of the time we don't. And the things that he's doing that he may bring about tomorrow or the next day in a concrete way, we don't even see that how they could be here tomorrow or the next day. God says, this is the kind of faith that pleases me. And not only that, this is the kind of faith that creates what kind of men? Strong men. Their lack of courage was turned to strength, and they became powerful in battle. You want to be a powerful man in ways that bring order, beauty, and life, and create environments and places where your family, your marriage, people around you, the relationships can flourish? You got to act like a man, but acting like a man first begins by trusting the God who made you. And he is an unseen God, moving amongst you and us in unseen ways, asking us to trust that what we do not yet see will come to pass. That's faith. What's my point? Every form of chaos that comes our way will test who we will trust with the care of our masculine souls. Will we trust an unseen God who is able to make fearful men strong? Or will we trust our self-protective strategies that leave fearful men weak? That's our choice. To act like a man with a crying wife begins by passing the test of faith. And it makes sense because if we are made not just an end in ourselves, but as a means to an end, to reflect God, we can't reflect God if we're not in a relationship of loyalty and faithfulness to him. And this is how he asks us as men to relate to him. To believe that he's working in ways that we cannot see. And we will live in light of that. And even in spite of that. Second thought. After choosing to trust men, then by faith move forward towards your wife with warrior courage. Again, how do you do this? Well, as men, you do it in spite of fear. It's okay to be afraid. You do it with the without a guarantee of a good outcome. You don't know how it's going to happen, but you know this is what God is asking you to do, and you're leaving the results to God. And you do it not to stop her tears or fix her problem that she seems to have. And you do it primarily by asking questions, and get this, guys, that will enter her. Notice, God made men to enter women. And not just physically enter women, but also emotionally and spiritually enter them as well. How do you enter your wife emotionally? Well, what are some entering questions? Entering questions, what are entering questions? Questions, they are questions driven by genuine curiosity about her. I want to know who this woman is. That will often leave you feeling vulnerable as a man. When I ask those kind of questions, I call them vulnerable curiosity. Because the questions I ask that I want to know about my wife, the answers that she gives, I may not always want to hear them. But I ask them anyway. Guys, that requires courage. And it requires faith. Why? Because her answer may not be something that can be fixed. You ever ask your wife, what's wrong, and she tells you something and you're thinking you're going to fix it, like I did at that restaurant? And it leaves you feeling helpless and frustrated when you can't fix it. Or if you ask her what's wrong and her answer may point to a genuine flaw in you or a disappointment with you, how does that leave you feeling? Well, vulnerable, so you get defensive and angry. Or you ask your wife what's wrong and her answer may be overwhelming and disturbing. And that leaves you worried and afraid. Man, there's something here. I don't know what to do with it, and it scares me to death. What's going to happen? All these answers that she could give you will leave you vulnerable. But they are entering questions. And we ask them in faith as we are present with our wife to enter her emotionally. Let me give you some examples of entering questions. Here's a good one. Honey, what is it about us that's triggering your tears? And then just listen. Another one. How long have you been feeling this way? Again, I'm curious, and we're asking questions that we may not want to hear. I've felt this way for 44 years. That's not what I wanted to hear. Like maybe a week you've been feeling this way?
Yeah, that's 44 years is more realistic.
What hurts you most about us? The problem is us. What hurts most about us? What part have I contributed to this hurt?
100%.
Well, not 100%. We all contribute equally but differently to the problems in our marriage. But I can only deal with me as a man. So, honey, what part have I contributed? What do you believe I feel or think about you? You know, most of the time your wife will feel you don't care for her, that you haven't chosen her, you've chosen other things, you'd rather be with other things, that you don't value her, you value other things. Remember what we said? Every woman longs to feel chosen and desired. Her greatest fear will be that you desire something else. And that as she invites you to come close, you refuse her invitation. Another question. What scares you about that belief? That I value something else more than you? That my job is more important than you are? How would you like me to feel or think about you? If this is how you think I feel about you, that I don't care about you, how would you like me to feel about you? What would you dream? What would your best scenario be how I would feel about you? I would long to feel chosen. I would long to feel like there's no one more important to me in all the world than you. What about that would make you feel good about us? And then the last one, when have you believed or felt that way in the past? That we were really connected, that we really cared about each other. Notice something about these questions. They're kind of a ladder. That as you ask each one, you're getting closer and closer and closer to her heart. And with every step you take that you're moving emotionally closer to her, guess what? You feel more vulnerable and vulnerable and vulnerable as a man. And the tendency will be to find a way to jump off the ladder, like I did, laughing when I saw that paper. Let me add a footnote here. 3 things to remember when entering questions, okay? Get this, guys. Your purpose in asking these questions is to know and understand your wife, not for your wife to know or understand you. In other words, as she's sharing these things, the temptation will be to say, well, this is how I feel about this, or this is how I feel you treat me, or whatever it is. You will have a turn, hopefully, but it's not your turn now. As a man, you have to lead, and you are leading by bringing order, beauty, and life to create this kind of a relationship where your marriage can flourish, and you do it first and foremost by seeking to know your wife. And so when you're asking these questions, you're asking them to know your wife and to understand her, not for you to tell her about yourself. Second, and by the way, when you do that, she will feel valued. Because now it's not about you. It's about her. Second, when she shares the things she does, reflect back to your wife what you hear her say and ask her if you got what she said. In other words, what I heard you say, honey, is that you feel like the things that I'm committed to at work are more valuable to you or to me than you. Is that right? Yep, that's how I feel. Is there more that you feel that way? So reflect back so that she knows you really did hear her. And if you ever have people reflect back to you when they say something to you, it does something. It does something. You feel heard. And you know what? Everybody in the world, most of us never feel heard. You know what your wife longs? She longs to feel heard from you. So reflect back. Thirdly, validate your wife's feelings, beliefs, fears, and emotions based on what she shared with you. Gosh, if you really feel that I don't care for you, that I care for the things at work more than you, I can see how you would really feel hurt and unloved by me. And how that I wouldn't really care for you. And I can imagine how that would be a really hurtful thing. When you validate your wife's feelings, she will feel understood by you. And guys, when a woman feels valued, heard, and understood, she opens up. But remember this too, guys, that entering your wife by asking and reflecting and validating does not require you to give up your point of view. In other words, she may feel that the marriage has never been good. You may feel like it's been good most of the time. You can validate and say, gosh, that's how you feel. Gosh, it's been really hard. But that doesn't mean that you have to agree with her, or that doesn't mean that you have to defend yourself. And if you can do that without needing to defend yourself or force her point of view on, or your point of view on her, guess what you will feel? You'll feel powerful. Why? Because you've been present with your wife. And you have listened and heard, and she has felt valued and heard and understood. So, entering questions. Third, by faith, open your eyes to see your wife with poetic imagination. You know, the danger is when you see your wife, you go home today and she's sitting there crying on the couch, to see her as a burden or a problem that I got to now deal with. That's the real temptation, isn't it? I don't have the energy to deal with this. What I'm saying here is that we have to open our eyes with a poetic imagination to see her in a different way. Now, how do you do that? Well, it begins with a heart of integrity. And what is integrity? Pretending about nothing. In other words, what you do is you see the chaos on the couch as it really is, through poetic imagination. And what do you see on the couch as it really is? What we see is a hurting, closed, fearful, lonely wife that you can't fix. She's not a burden. She bears the image of God and is made to reflect beauty. But instead of reflecting beauty, she's hurting, she's closed, she's afraid, she's lonely, she doesn't feel loved. And you can't fix it. That's a heart of integrity. And as a result, you don't act with avoidance or anger or fear or shame. But instead you feel godly sorrow. And godly sorrow is just looking at your wife and saying, this isn't the way it's supposed to be. This isn't how God wants it to be. This isn't how He created it to be. This isn't how I want it to be. And it's that godly sorrow that forms a holy discontentment. I can't let it be like this anymore. And that moves you to open your eyes with faith. Now you're already trusting in an unseen God to move in unseen ways to bring about yet unseen things. But now you're looking at your wife with those same eyes of faith. And what you do is you imagine her as the woman God designed her to be. Not a hurting, closed, fearful, lonely wife that you can't fix, but rather an open, inviting, nurturing, beautiful female image bearer that's thriving. Because that's what God is working in her life to create. And He's working in you to partner with Him to bring that about. And these eyes of faith, this vision that you have for your wife is rooted in God's larger story of the coming new creation. It's going to be this way someday perfectly. But until then, we can move towards it and we can get better glimpses of it. And as you believe that, and as you understand that God is moving in that way in your wife's life, guess what you do? God, I'm going to join you in the process. And I don't know what the outcome will be, and I'm not doing this to get a certain outcome. I'm doing this because what you've created this to be. I'm doing it with a transcendent purpose because I want my wife to be all what you have created her to be, so I move into that. And as I said, it moves you forward in love and hope to engage the chaos. Now I'm moving towards my wife, not as a burden and a problem to be fixed, but someone that I deeply love and someone that I have hope for, that I can cooperate with God in bringing about this new creation. Guys, when you begin to think in those terms, it changes you. And not only does your wife feel blessed to have a husband like you, but you feel powerful as a man. Not in a way that gets what you want, by keeping others in their place, but a man who uses his power to bring life-giving environments where your wife and your kids and others can thrive, and all those relationships flourish. Because that's what men were made for. And so then, what do we see today? To act like a man with a crying wife will require that we move towards her by faith as a warrior poet. That's what we've seen. And we move as a warrior poet with warrior courage, and that involves movement. In spite of fear, movement where the outcome is not guaranteed, and movement where the outcome is not the primary concern. It involves poetic imagination, which is about seeing, and we see with eyes of faith what could be. We see with rooted in God's story, eyes of faith that are rooted in God's story, what will someday be. And we see with eyes of faith that move us with love and hope towards what is. And a concluding thought. All this really sounds good, but because responding to chaos as a warrior poet is never our natural inclination. When I see my wife upset, when I see my wife hurt, when I see chaos in other places, my kids, all of this, my natural inclination isn't to move towards it as a warrior poet. You know what our natural inclination is? To move towards it as a dreamer destroyer. That's our natural inclination. And because that is our natural inclination, to move as a warrior poet will always require a conscious choice. It won't happen by accident. But this choice, as we've seen today, must always be grounded in a robust faith that believes this: an unseen God is moving in my life in unseen ways to make me a fearful man, a weak man, into a strong, powerful man. Guys, that's what God wants us to be. That's what He saved us through Jesus to be. And that's what He is redeeming us to be. And that's what our future in the new creation will be. And the joy that we have right now is to begin to have tastes of that as we learn to trust Him and lean forward by faith into the chaos as a warrior poet. And with that, what is a strong man? What is a strong man? What is a powerful man? Well, he's simply a male image bearer who reflects God's life-giving power by choosing to trust God as he moves into chaos to bring order, beauty, and life in order to create good environments where people can thrive and relationships can flourish. That's what I want for myself. And that's what I want for you. But more importantly, that's what the God who created us wants for us, to the point that He has given His Son to make that possible, and He has indwelt us who have trusted Him with His Spirit to move us forward in that direction. So with that, next time we're going to look about this thing called toxic masculinity, which a lot of people think is just a man using strength, a man being powerful, but it really isn't. It's about a man using power as a dreamer destroyer. And where did that come from? Well, that's toxic masculinity is the legacy of Adam that's lived out in his sons. So, hope this was helpful today, and we will break here for a time of questions.